The Russian Grandmother's Wondertales, Chapter 14, Mother's Mother. The happy day had come. The little boy was all ready for the journey, dressed in a colored shirt hanging over his full trousers. The white shirt must be kept clean for Sunday, you know. His kaftan, well belted down and with a small fur collar at the neck, and on his head a high fur hat, just like his father's. The little boy's mother had on all her warm clothes, with a long fur overcoat over all her other wraps, and the father, besides his great fur overcoat, had on his fur hat and high fur-lined boots, into the wide tops of which his full trousers were tucked. He had a great basket in his hand containing food for the journey, and a pair of fowls and some other things for the mother's mother, whom they were going to visit. In his inside pocket, the father had the papers of the mirror, which he must carry to the Semstuo. So they were all ready. All the men and children of the village accompanied them to the station, which was in the midst of a wide plain, a quarter of a league beyond the last house. There was a good while to wait. The train was not due for half an hour, but that did not matter. The grown folk had a deal of talking to do. All the privileges that they hoped the Starosta would secure from the Semstuo for the commune. As for the children, well, this was the chance of their lives, for their station had a playground with swings, wooden horses, and giant strides. And it was not often that they had such privileges, especially the uniformed school children. For when once a Russian child puts on the school uniform, play is pretty much nearly over for him for the rest of his life, so they made the most of their opportunity. It was not a cold day for January, and if it had been, they would not have minded. When the train came lumbering in, as it did after a while, half a dozen more children jumped down from the second and third class cars and ran to the playground. The other children made way for them, for the station playgrounds are for traveling children, and they had the first right. Yet there was room for them all. But the little boy was impatient to be on his travels, so he ran to his mother and was very glad when the men of the commune had said their last words to their representative, and the Starosta led his wife and little boy to a good place in a compartment where there was room for the samovar. Presently, the first warning was given. The children came running from the playground. There was a chorus of goodbyes. The second warning sounded, and the train jolted away. The little boy was a traveling child at last. At every stop where there was a playground, he would run out and have a swing, his mother going with him, for he was a little boy to be among strangers. After a while he was hungry, and then his mother unpacked her basket and set the samovar a-going, and gave a lump of bread and a big piece of sausage to each, with unlimited cups of scalding tea that made them nice and warm. After that, the little boy leaned his head against his mother, and then, most wonderful, they were already at the capital, and the stars were shining. Where had the afternoon gone? He had not time to ask, for his father had swung him upon his shoulder and was carrying him through the crowd. And there, outside the wicket, was a little old woman with such a nice face, who fell upon his mother's neck and kissed her again and again. "That is your other grandmother," said his father. "Your mother has not seen her since she was married, and that is many years ago." And then the other grandmother caught the little boy from his father's arms and kissed him and cried over him till the little boy did not know whether he ought to cry or not. He became well acquainted with the other grandmother the next day. She did not seem like his own dear little grandmother at home, but she was very nice. He called her Mother's Mother, because she was not his real grandmother, he thought. And the other grandmother laughed and said that would do very well. In the afternoon, when his father had gone back to the Semstuo, and his mother was clearing up after dinner, which she said her mother was not to do while she was there, the little boy went and stood by his other grandmother's chair. "Mother's mother," he said, "little grandmama told me that you knew some nice stories." "Yes," said Mother's mother, "I suppose I do. They are not like your little grandmama's stories. The stories of this commune are different. They are more about the Vilas than those of your commune are. Yours are mostly about Renniki and the other beasts, are they not?" "I like Renniki and the beasts," said the little boy, "but I should like the Vilas too, Mother's mother." "Then I will tell you about them," said the other grandmother. "Sit down on that stool. It was your mother's when she was a little girl." "That is right. Now I will tell you about the Vila of Muhlenberg. Once upon a time there was an aged widow who had only one son, whom she watched and cherished in her old age. Now there was a great war at that time all over the world. Every man who could bear arms was forced to go into the army, and among others the widow's son. There he so distinguished himself for bravery on every occasion that he was promoted to be captain. Now it happened one time that they suffered a defeat. Among the wounded was our captain, and as he lay upon the ground, he prayed God to spare his life, at least until he had seen his old mother. He was in the greatest danger, for all around him the enemy was killing the wounded. Suddenly, an aged dame stood before him and asked him what he was praying for, promising him that she would grant his wish. Without taking time to think, he answered, "Give me a horse, that I may escape before the enemy murder me." Upon this, she struck upon the earth with the staff that was in her hand, and softly murmured a few words. Suddenly, a noble steed stood before him, all saddled and bridled. He had only to mount it. He looked around to thank the old dame, but she had vanished. The captain sprang into the saddle, gave the horse the spur, and flew from the spot like an arrow from the bow. He rode on for a long time, without noticing in what direction the horse was carrying him, when suddenly it stopped. He looked around and saw before him a great city with many church towers, which shone so brightly that they fairly dazzled his eyes. He rode into the city and was overcome with astonishment, for all around him was nothing but stone. Men, women, animals, everything he set his eyes upon was turned to stone, for this was an enchanted city, and the horse was a vila, and had vanished from under him as soon as he had entered the precincts of the city. Perhaps he himself would have remained the whole day upon the spot, as if turned to stone, had he not suddenly beheld before him a maiden with golden hair. When she saw him, she uttered a cry and hastened up into the golden castle. He followed close upon her footsteps, but before the castle gate he met the same old woman who had given him the horse. He greeted her prettily and asked her what was all this about, the golden-haired maiden and the enchanted city. Hereupon the old dame told him the following story. Many, many years ago, this city was the greatest and the most beautiful in the whole world. An emperor lived here who was so benevolent and such a lover of justice that whenever he heard that anyone had done his neighbor a kindness, he rewarded him so richly and with such distinction that he could live to his dying day in peace and happiness. On the other hand, he was unmercifully severe to evildoers, and caused everyone who was guilty of any sort of crime to be put to death at once. For this reason, Some wicked men killed him and his only son. But as they were murdering the son, they heard an awful voice which said, "Miserable wretches, you have killed him who was your benefactor and father. Be accursed, therefore, for 1,000 years, until a youth shall come and loose you from this ban." But the emperor's daughter, whom the Lord had given to me, remained alive, for God said, "She shall be the reward of him who frees you." Meantime, however, she was turned to stone until the moment when you entered the city. Then she awoke, cried, "The liberator is come," and brought the news to me. You yourself have seen her. So spoke the old dame, and full of joy, the young man asked her what he was to do in order to loose the city from the spell. She answered, "I can give you no counsel, but you will soon find that out above. And now, as you have no more need of me, farewell, in God's name. But first, I will tell you who I am. I am a Vila. If ever you should fall into any trouble, you have only to call, 'Vila, stand by me,' and you shall be helped." She spoke, and was already gone. The young man and the maiden were now in doubt as to what they ought to do. They would gladly have wedded each other, but where to find a priest or anyone else? So they went into a church to pray to God, and the maiden said to the youth, "From this hour you are my husband, and I am your wife till death. But go at least and set the bells a-ringing, that our nuptials may be celebrated in some way." Hardly had the first note pealed forth from the bells when everything breathed and lived. The men, the beast, everything, in short, which had been turned to stone. Then all the people broke out into the cry, "God save our liberator, now and evermore." The first thing was to celebrate a magnificent wedding, when the Pope united the pair forever in the presence of the whole assembled people. Everyone rejoiced, eating and drinking as if they never meant to leave off. The young couple lived for several years in joy and happiness, until at last the king was overcome with an ardent longing to see his dear mother. He confided this wish to his wife, whereupon she led him into the royal stables and presented him with 4 horses, saying, "Here, I give you these 4 horses. You must know that they are Vila's, and they will take you to your home, for you have no idea how far away it is. But if anyone there asks you where you have been and what you have been doing all this time, beware of telling them the truth, for if you relate your adventures, the Vilas will vanish, and you will never be able to come back to me again." He promised her everything that she asked, and set out for home. When he arrived, he found his dear mother no longer living. His heart was wrung with sorrow, for there he stood alone in the world, brotherless, sisterless, without a single relative. The people questioned him incessantly, until at last, in a moment of weakness, he yielded to their importunities and told them his story. But the words had hardly passed his lips when the horses vanished. He was inconsolable for their loss, for he loved his wife more than his own soul. He therefore determined to seek her out, even if it cost him his head. So he traveled on, and on, and on, until he came to the moon. There was no one at home but the Moon Mother, for the moon had just gone out. When the Moon Mother saw the young man, she was full of pity for him, and said, "Do you not know, unhappy one, that my son will tear you in pieces as soon as he gets home? But come, I will hide you." And she hid him in a chest. When at last the moon came home, tired and cross, he called out in a thundering voice, "Women, there is a Christian soul staying here. Out with him." His mother besought her son to spare the young man's life, and finally she succeeded in mollifying him. "Well, then I won't do him any harm," said the moon. "Only let him show himself." Upon this, the old woman opened the chest and brought the young man before her son. The youth drew near to the moon, bowed low before him, and said, "Mighty moon, you shed your mild rays over the whole earth. Tell me if you know anything of a city called Muhlenberg." The moon replied, "I indeed shine over the whole round earth, but I have never heard of any Muhlenberg. Therefore, I counsel you, seek out my brother, the sun. Perhaps he can tell you something about it." The young man thanked the moon and went to the moon's brother, the sun, and said, "Your brother, the moon, sends greeting and says, in case you know anything about the city Muhlenberg, you are to tell me." The sun replied that he knew nothing of any such city, and sent him to the north wind, saying, "This wind blows everywhere and searches out the most hidden corners. Perhaps he knows the city." But the north wind sent him to the east wind, and the east wind sent him to the west wind, and the west wind sent him to the south wind, the most fearful of all the winds. When the young man appeared before the south wind, he bowed low and said, "I bring you greetings from all your relatives, the sun, the moon, the north wind, the east wind, and the west wind, and you are to give me some information about the city Muhlenberg." Said the south wind, "I have just come from Muhlenberg. There will soon be grand doings in that city, for the queen is going to be married." Then the young man implored the south wind to take him there. The south wind answered, "It is pretty far from here, and you don't know the way, but take this apple, and wherever it rolls, do you follow it, and you will come to Muhlenberg." The young man bade the south wind adieu, and followed the apple, going on for a long, long time. Suddenly, he came upon some robbers. He went up to them, as if they were old acquaintances, exclaiming, "Good day to you, brothers. Are you right well? Here I am, with you at last." They really believed that he was one of themselves, so they took him with them, and showed him a coat which had the power of rendering invisible the person who wore it. Next they showed him a pair of boots that would enable one to put a mile behind him at every step. He put on both the coat and the boots, as if to test the truth of the story, and immediately made off. The robbers could not even think of trying to follow him, since they could not see him. So he rolled the apple again along the ground before him, and at last he arrived at Muhlenberg. He heard music in every part of the city. Cannons were thundering, and above all swept the south wind. When the south wind saw him, he went down and greeted him, saying, "So here we are, at last, in Muhlenberg." The young man now went into the city, and being still invisible, he helped himself to all the food and drink he wanted, and refreshed himself with his gossip, the south wind. Then, taking leave of him, he made his way into the royal palace, which had once been his own. There he saw the queen beside the newly chosen spouse, whom she was about to marry, and heard her sigh, "Just 7 years ago today, my beloved husband deserted me." Upon this, he began to sing a song which he used to be always singing when he was king. She recognized it at once, and full of joy cried out, "My first good fortune! My wedding guests, drink the foaming wine and take your leave. I have no need to marry, for my husband has come home again, my only joy and bliss." And from this time they lived long and happily together, and the queen bore to her husband a son, with a mole like a golden sword upon his arm, and a beautiful golden-haired daughter. So ends the story. "I should like to go to the moon," observed the little boy. "They don't go nowadays," said the other grandmother. "That was long ago, before my great-grandmother was born." End of chapter 14. Please go to the next video for chapter 15. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this reading, do give it a like and share it with your friends and family. Thanks in advance for all your support, and see you again tomorrow.